Okay, so I spent the last couple of hours probably drawing and tracing onto wood the formers. So here's the formers we're talking about, and all I've simply done basically is laid a piece of tracing paper over here, traced around each former. In this case you can see former 1, former 2, former 3. So let's find in this pile former 2, traced around it, and then basically just stuck that tracing paper down onto the wood and cut it out. And I've cut here a cutout to make it a U shape, nondescript cutout, no specific size, just I tried to keep the thicknesses where the wood mounts to the deck the same here, just for looking neatness, but no other reason. Looking neat, but no other reason than that. These cutouts are entirely arbitrary, and just to allow access through each set of formers if you have a number of formers together, rather than solid formers that you've got to cut out later. So as an example, this is former 2. It was simply traced off and cut out, and you can see there now how former 2 sits in position. Might need a little bit of finessing with sandpaper yet, but sits in position there. The height there is taken up with the thickness of the deck. So it's the same for all the formers all the way through, wherever I put them. Seem to be missing one. Oh, I've left one downstairs, not to worry. But there's this V former here, former 3. Try to see them quickly now. Former 3, there we are. If we offer that up there, former 3 sits, the distance between the former and the line is taken up by 3mm balsa wood. That's where the deck sits again, in this position here. If there's any little misalignments, it can always be packed or padded, but I think it should be all right. One of the things with a jigsaw going through this is it cuts through it like butter, and in some cases it goes through it too easily. You can see here I've put a slot into former 3. What I'm actually going to do is remove that component there just by knifing that out, and with a bit of luck that former will now sit here. A little bit sloppy, so I'll have to pack that, but just needs a tiny bit of tweaking so that that face and that face is flush. But that will basically, if I just take a knife to that, I'll pack it with a little bit of thin material in a second. If I just tweak that depth a little bit more. Tweak that depth there. Get there. In essence, what I should be able to do now is, if I sit former 13 in position 13, I should get that. If I then sit this over here, line it up again, so I'm lining it up with a line there, like that. Can we see how that shape is starting to create the stern of the boat, the transom of the boat? Probably be easy to block some of this in rather than trying to plank around that shape, but that's straightforward with some thick block. Former 13, former 12 should be next. So I've got to put a slot in this. I've got to cut down that, because as you can see we can't put that into place yet, but this former will sit here, so I'll have to cut 6mm out the centre of that yet, because, and the reason that one's been cut and trimmed back again, because of the hole, we're going to have 2 prop shafts running through at this position on the boat. So it's all coming along nicely. Once we've got all this assembled in place, not forgetting that if I just slide this forward here, that former sits there, this former sits here like that, this will then sit in this position, and you can see shapes are starting to appear. I'm only holding them in place, they fit a lot better than they look at the moment, but we can see those shapes are starting to show themselves which will enable us to plank these areas. If I take former, not former 3, which former did I have? Former, was it former 10 I think? No, former 9 I'm looking for. Where is it? There we are. Former 9 is a good example. Here's this cutout we've got in this position. So we know that this area of the hull is flat. Anything outside of this line starts to curve up, so we can't use this wood for it. If I put former 9 in place, it should fit there. So there's the line. It just fits nicely to the rear face of that line. If I just lift it up slightly, you'll see a step there. That's where the 3mm wood runs and butts up against this. So the 3mm will come down here. But you can see that's not perfectly straight, that line. Can you see it deviates away from the flat if I hold that up like that? Hence the reason that this part isn't part of this as a flat. So balsa wood will come around here and create this curve and then be fed into this. And the same with 10 and the preceding one. So you can see why I've got this sort of straight edge here, but it's a divergent straight edge from the line that we want, because look, we need that. Just it's where the curve starts at the back of the boat. So it's a good example of that and how it fits. Former 8, for instance, to save on material, there's 2 former 8s. Okay, and what happens here is one of those goes there and one of those goes there. So the same thing happens with the flat here. The balsa wood comes down, but the bonus now is I've got this space inside the hull. Don't know whether I can hold that or not. This space is empty inside the hull, so I've got space for batteries to go, or lead to go, or motors to sit. I've got space to get myself into the hull, because it's a big, wide but very flat hull, this one. You can see the width of it from there. So hopefully that you'll start to see some explanation or some idea of where things are going. If we look here, these 4, there's 8 of these forms, as I've discussed before. They all sit there, 1, 2, 3, 4, because the hull is equal beam across the boat at that point. So they'll be very easy to add, making sure that they're vertical and you know, put in at 90 degrees to all axis. That's quite a simple part of the boat to model that. It's everything's straight, there's no convex or concave curves. It becomes more complicated at this end of the boat, and at the bow's not so much. Bow's relatively straightforward, but both ends of the boats are quite complicated. So I'm going to finesse some of these parts, make sure they fit a little bit better, pack them where I need to, and start gluing some of these formers down to this base. Obviously I'll move my mat so that everything's sat nice and solid and flat on my work surface. And over the next couple of hours, I'll come back where maybe 70% of the formers are in, and I can set the deck in place, and then we can look at where we're going to actually end up planking with balsa wood and how we're going to do that. So that'll be the next stage as we move on. Another stage is we have all these cutouts now, more cutouts than we need in reality. I also need to figure out where the cutouts need to be on the deck over there for access later on in the boat's life, as we're adding batteries and ballast and things, but also to make coamings for those deck superstructures to sit on, so that we can lift them off and get access to the inside of the boat should we need it when the boat's running, or when we need it for rigging up motors and such like. Relatively small motors for this. It's not a speedboat. It's a pretty slow, well, it's not even a battleship. Like I said, it's a monitor. So relatively slow, very draggy, flat bottom hull, good for shallow waters. Okie dokie. I shall come back to you when I've got some more of this assembled.